The next challenge says the following. I have a neighbor who insists on working on the Sabbath. Exodus 35:2 clearly states he should be put to death. Am I morally obligated to kill him myself?
This is going to be a tough one.
Yeah.
This is going to be a tricky one.
And you see I'm morally obligated to kill him myself. You see the irony and sarcasm in that. That like, the moral thing is to go to my neighbor who's working on the Sabbath and slaughter him, kill him. Right? So, behind this, I think there's two challenges to the Torah in this statement. One of them is generally on the fact that the Torah is full of death penalties. That throughout the Torah we see many things that get the death penalty.
Homosexuality,
Yeah, and many other sexual immorality, and many examples. That's general. And more specifically, it's one thing to have death penalty for murder or kidnapping, but to have the death penalty for breaking the Sabbath, because my neighbor decides that he wants to work on the Sabbath, so he gets the death penalty, that seems to be going beyond a certain line, because there are many people, even in the secular world, who promote and believe in the death penalty. They say that it is a good thing. It's an effective punishment. And that's debated in many secular societies. But to have a death penalty for ritual transgression, for somebody who has a religious transgression, they've done something wrong because they didn't keep the Sabbath, they didn't hurt anybody, didn't kill anyone, didn't steal or murder, they just did work on the Sabbath. To have a death penalty for that, it sounds wrong.
I think it deserves it.
Yeah? Okay, so you're an advocate. But there aren't many. So first of all, a little bit of a general view of the death penalty itself. So, practically speaking, the death penalty was not a very common thing to be enacted. Even though the Torah does have a long list of things that were worthy of the death penalty, it didn't actually happen that people were put to death all that often. Like the Talmud says that if a court would execute one person in 70 years, that would be considered a bloodthirsty court. So once in 70 years was already uncommon for a court to put someone to death. It didn't happen all that often. The reason is because to be put to death for anything, you needed to have witnesses, 2 witnesses, who were not related to you or to each other, who witnessed the act, warned you before you did the act that if you do this, you're going to be put to death, saw you respond to that warning, they know that you heard it and you acknowledged it, and nevertheless you went and did the act, having been warned, having received the warning, and the witnesses saw you do it. Then the witnesses would come to court, they'd be cross-examined, and if their cross-examination, they would stand through the cross-examination, which was extreme and pedantic and to the detail. If they made it through the cross-examination, then someone would be put to death. And there had to be no extenuating circumstance, no possibility that there's anything wrong. It was very unusual and rare for it to happen. So the death penalty was more a statement of how serious the thing you're doing is, as opposed to how likely it is you're going to be put to death for it. So there were people put to death, but it wasn't all that common. It was more of a statement. And indeed, many people who promote the death penalty even today say that having the death penalty is a statement of our values, that this is how serious we take something, that if you transgress this, you deserve to be put to death.
So a deterrent.
More of a deterrent than anything else. Now others say it's not a deterrent, doesn't work. So some thinkers have said, well, let's do an experiment. Well, how about we had a thing where, let's say we had the death penalty for murder, but only murders that were done on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Any murder committed on Monday, Wednesday, or Friday would get the death penalty, whereas a murder on any other day would be life in prison. So would there not be a reduction in murders on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays? Does anyone think that there would be no difference? That it wouldn't make any difference if it was known that you get the death penalty if you do it today, but if you wait till tomorrow, life imprisonment is the worst you're going to get. Would there be no difference? Most people would say that there probably would be. Others argue, no, there wouldn't be any difference. Either way, even if it's not a deterrent, it's still a statement. If you grow up in a world that knows that murder gets the death penalty, that's the law, even if it doesn't happen all that often. But if you know that that's the punishment, you know that my society that I'm growing up with takes this seriously, takes murder seriously, or whatever it is. So the death penalty was a statement of how serious something is, as opposed to the way things are today, where somebody could be a murderer, convicted, guilty, all very clear, and then they get to live the rest of their life in relative comfort compared to some others, living in prison, which we have to pay for, and quite often they get out as well. They don't always stay there for life either. So the death penalty certainly has backing to it. But that's all when we're talking about a murderer. Most of us would agree that somebody who has murdered intentionally to get the death penalty, there's at least an argument for it. But somebody's broken Shabbos, what is there an argument to put such a person to death? Okay, it had to be with warning and with witnesses and the whole thing. It didn't mean in the privacy of their own home they broke Shabbos. It meant publicly, with others not seeing that they broke Shabbos. But still, to put them to death seems
So if someone
a
did
little
this
bit too...
privately, according to Torah, there's no death penalty. If someone broke Shabbos privately, but with witnesses there, like
I don't know, well, witness is not private. If it was witnessed,
so
then
let's
they'll
say
warn.
someone's looking through the window and sees someone breaking Shabbos,
They have to warn them.
and they warn them,
So
then it's
yeah.
not then it's
They
considered
warn them
public.
and they do it, then it's considered, it's been witnessed, it's public, you were warned, it's intentional, so you get the death penalty. Whether this ever happened, whether anyone was ever put to death for Shabbos, it's not known.
I don't think that's I don't think that's an argument though, whether it happened or not. The thing is, the Torah says
Correct.
that it can happen, and that's what should happen.
Correct. So how could it even say that? Even to say that seems too much.
Yeah.
This one also Maimonides deals with in his Guide to the Perplexed. And he explains why is there a death penalty for such a thing. So we have to put it again into a bit of perspective. The death penalty, in the time that it was enacted, was in a time when the Jewish people were centered in the land of Israel. The rule of the Jewish people were ruled by Torah law, and the entire Jewish nation was observant. There may have been individuals here and there who had drifted from observance, but the main body of the Jewish people were all observant of Jewish law. Being Jewish meant living the Jewish life, keeping Shabbos, keeping the festivals, keeping kosher, doing all this thing. That was what it meant, living in Israel under Torah law. In such a circumstance, to break Shabbos knowingly, with witnesses who saw you doing it, not privately with no one seeing, with the warning, to do such a thing was an affront to the Jewish people as a whole, was a statement of disconnect from what the Jewish people were doing, and was also a challenge to the fabric of society. That the type of society that Torah is trying to create, one that is holy, one that is bringing holiness into the world, one that is connected to God and the ways of God, a holy kingdom, a nation of priests, the type of world that the Torah is trying to create would be so interrupted, so disrupted by even one person who is publicly going against that. And so the reason why for us it's such a foreign thing is because we live in the exact opposite. In our world, keeping Shabbos is the exception, not the rule. You're the strange person. You're the one who's doing something that no one else is doing. You're keeping Shabbos. No one else does that. The majority of people around us, even Jews around us, don't keep Shabbos. So you're the one person who does it. That's the exception. Whereas back then it was the other way around. Everyone kept Shabbos. And so you're going not keeping Shabbos. You're going and introducing the possibility that a Jew could reject Shabbos. That was such an anomaly, such an exception, such a stain on the Jewish people that it had to be taken seriously. And to say that you get the death penalty for that meant that because you are unraveling the fabric of Jewish society by going against the Torah in such a way. And so therefore back then it made a lot of sense. It made a lot of sense that somebody rebelling against Judaism to that extent is so dangerous. It could end up loosening the ties of the entire community. Because when one person starts to do it, then another does, and then the whole system starts to fall apart. It was a real rebellion, and so it had to be blotted out, got rid of. And then it made sense. Whereas now it wouldn't make sense. And in fact, even in the times of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court, there came a time when it made no sense already. In fact, the death penalty ended not when the Sanhedrin was destroyed and the temple was destroyed, but before that. The Sanhedrin was still there, was still sitting, and they voluntarily disbanded themselves. Because as long as there's a Sanhedrin, there could be a death penalty. They said, we're going to disband the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court, because we cannot do the death penalty anymore. And the reason why? Because they said things are not the same as they used to be. It used to be everyone was keeping Jewish law, and so somebody who broke it was such an exception that it had to be dealt with. But now, in this is already in temple times, but towards the end of the temple times, things were going so bad, the spiritual state of the Jewish people was so bad, the death penalty lost its meaning. Because people weren't taking it seriously anymore. People weren't scared of it anymore. It didn't have its deterrence value. People didn't take Jewish law seriously. So then they disbanded it voluntarily. The death penalty stopped. So while indeed we would not today put anyone to death for breaking the Sabbath, if your neighbor is breaking the Sabbath, and certainly never was the death penalty enacted by yourself. You didn't do it yourself. It was done in a court scenario. So the way the question is presented is as if it's, you go and slaughter the guy in your it was a court system. It was a court procedure. But anyway, this law wouldn't apply today, but it did have relevance when it did.